Hello, and welcome to another episode of Construction Voices, the podcast where we talk about the ins and outs and the ups and downs of the construction industry. I am your host, Julianne Tolentino, here to discuss and dissect the trending topics revolving around the Middle East construction sector. All right, so joining us today as our expert guest is Tom Ryle, Product Systems Manager at Terraco. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today. It is a pleasure from my side. How are you feeling?
Good. Thank you very much for having me, and good morning here. I think it's the afternoon there, so it's good to meet you.
Yeah. Right. So for those of you who are curious, I'm in Dubai and Tom is in Ireland, I believe.
That's correct, yeah.
Yes. So yeah, the things that technology enables us to do. So we're doing this over a Teams call. So that's quite interesting. Anyway, so Terraco, we're here to talk about, Terraco and your expertise, of course, as the product systems manager. But before we go and dive deep into that, just a little bit of a background of Terraco. They're established in 1980. They are a leader in the design, formulation, and production of eco-friendly finishing materials, performance products, and systems for the construction industry. And today we're going to be talking about something quite specific that Tom will, walk us through, and that's the EIFS. But again, before we jump right in, Tom, could you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Okay, thank you. Basically, I've worked with the Terraco Group for the last 10 years. I'm, as you mentioned, the Product Systems Manager for the Terraco Group, and I work from the Terraco Technical Centre here in Ireland. So that's the Research and Development Centre for the Terraco Group. My own background is in architecture, project management, and international construction systems certification, building energy ratings, etc. over the last 20 years. So basically, in relation to Terraco, I joined 10 years ago, as I said, and it coincided with the sort of introduction of mandatory energy efficient measures in the Middle East in many Gulf countries. So the national building regulations would required external wall insulation, and EIFS is what my background was in Terraco and in the last 20 years, energy conservation. So that's basically the background I'm coming from.
Right. 10 years is a long time, isn't it?
Yeah. There's been really from the start with Terraco in the Middle East was a big focus because of the introduction of energy efficient measures. So we have a Terraco EIFS system which really came into play because it was perfect for the Middle East environment, when the building regulations were made mandatory in relation to thermally efficient external walls. So that's really how I ended up with an association in the Middle East with our factories there in the Middle East.
Right. So you talk about, and you've mentioned EIFS, but I think it will be a really good thing to have you give us a crash course on what really is EIFS. Maybe what are the principles of EIFS, if you could tell our listeners.
Okay, yeah. Well, EIFS is sometimes called EIFS. You'll hear me jump in and out of the word EIFS, or external insulation finish systems. It stands for external insulation finish systems. That's the American term for it. In Europe, it's called ETICS, which would be exterior thermal insulation composite systems, and even in the UK they call it external wall insulation. So there's different names. But basically behind it all, they're all internationally tested and internationally certified systems. They provide a guaranteed energy efficiency to an external wall. That's via the insulation board thickness and the insulation thermal conductivity. It's a long durable, low maintenance finish goes on top of the insulation board via a reinforced base coat, and ultimately it's finished with typically with a color texture finish coat, but there's a myriad of finishes also that can be used. So also in the systems, because it's a cladding system and it's a modern cladding system, it has to have all the the testing will be designed for fire safety, for wind load resistance, water resistance, for the durability of a facade, really according to international standards, which tend to be the EU and USA EIFS standards or ethics standards. So it's really ensures that the certified EIFS systems are designed for the facade, for the design life of the building. So that's the basis.
Right, and these facades that you're talking about, they're specifically made for buildings in the Middle East. Is it according to each country? You tweak them a little bit, or how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, it's the systems are pretty similar. They're across the world. The mineral wool systems and EPS systems, they're based on the insulation materials, and then obviously the testing has to be done individually for each system in relation to the facades, and then for each country, there'd be different levels of insulation thickness would be required in the Middle East, as opposed to in a very hot climate, as opposed to a very cold climate. So, which probably leads us to the fact that if in a heating climate, such as where I live in Europe, it's in Ireland, it's 2 degrees at the moment. So, it would be used as an insulation material, and for energy efficient external walls, from reducing the heating costs, while in the Middle East it's reducing air conditioning cooling costs by for the opposite effect. So that's the basis for because of the temperature differential in the Middle East. If it's 40 degrees outside and it's 23 degrees inside, it's a similar differential between the temperatures. So the thermal insulation slows the rate of flow of heat or cold energy between the inside and outside. So that's the sort of technical basis. I'm probably getting a little bit technical for some of your listeners.
No, it's fine. No, actually, my next question to you is, are EIFS systems regarded as new or untested? Because I know that Terraco is one of the companies that specializes in it and talks about it quite a bit. But is it regarded as something that a lot of that is mandated, or is something that you, in Terraco, just kind of specializes in?
Yeah, I mean, the EIFS systems and ethics systems around the world have been in existence for 50, 60 years, so they're not new. In the Middle East, because of the U value, or because of the thermal insulation requirements, in relation to external walls, the thermal efficiencies that are required in external walls typically requires insulation, and that before 2014, 2010 in the Middle East, uninsulated buildings were the norm. In Europe and the rest of the world, and particularly in colder climates, insulation has been around for 40, 50, 60 years. So again, that's the difference between it. And the fact of the matter is, I suppose, over the last 10 years, because of the building regulations in progressive countries, that energy efficiency, where it's been mandated for new buildings, such as in UAE and Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Oman, some of the Gulf regions are a little bit slower in implementing mandatory energy efficiency, but generally the whole industry of energy efficient buildings is requiring external insulation wall systems, and EIFS is the best system. I'm biased, of course, being in Terraco, but definitely it's recognised in Europe and America as energy efficient systems. So they've been installed for 50, 60 years in America. So again, that's certified systems. I keep coming back to the fact they're certified. They have to be tested.
But I think that's what makes it really great, because when people know that it's been certified and tested, I think there's a lot more backing behind it, and the construction sector kind of tends to be quite traditional in these ways, so that's a really good thing. Yeah. Anyway, so I think my next question for you, especially since we're talking about the Middle East, is what type of EIFS projects have Terraco been involved in this region so far?
I mean, Terraco have been involved in new build projects is the main business in the Middle East. Retrofit, I'll hope to talk about later on, is not yet common in the Middle East, but it's very popular, for example, in Europe. Like 50% of EIFS projects in Europe are basically retrofit, which is older building stock, which is upgraded to energy efficient measures. And the industry in Europe would maybe have 300 million square meters a year of ethics or EIFS, and 50% of that is retrofit. In the Middle East, it's basically new build at the moment, but in the future, I think it's going to be the retrofit market will also gain traction over the years as the industry develops. So, but in general, the Middle East, the entire world, it's driven by energy efficient building codes. So that's the driver. In the Middle East, Terraco we've worked in most of the largest markets of where energy efficiency measures is prominent in UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So over the last 10 years, we've done 4 million square meters of projects throughout the Middle East. So, it's a well-established business, and it's steady, which allows everyone to get up to speed on without being inundated. It's a steady business that's going to get bigger, and we've done a lot of the times, because it's the finish is a rendered finish. Specifiers wouldn't know exactly that it's EIFS on the outside or EIFS. So, like, we've done all types of projects: residential villas, apartment blocks, schools, commercial buildings, mosques, hospitals, everything really.
Yeah.
So we've also high prestigious jobs. We've worked on the Pavilion on the Expo 2020 projects, the Fairmont Hotel. We have hundreds of projects, thousands of projects. You basically can see, if people are interested, they can have a look at them on the Terraco website. There's a section on projects that are EIFS. So we've even done a project, a very interesting project for Tata Realty in India, which was just outside Delhi, which a couple of years ago. So it's even that was through Terraco UAE. So there's traction outside of traditional areas. That's subtropical climates as well as dry. So it's moving in that direction.
Absolutely. Look, I think the Middle East is in a period of time right now, not just the Middle East, but just in also Saudi Arabia specifically. We're in a time when, mega projects and giga projects are sprouting left and right. And I think more so today, since the COP28 just finished in November, the conversations are now switching to sustainability and sustainable construction. And I'm glad that you mentioned retrofitting, because you're right, it's not yet too big in the Middle East as of now, but I presume it to be a lot bigger in the next 5 years maybe. So yeah, I think that's it's going to be a bigger conversations moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. Retrofit is something that Terraco is well accustomed to, and a slightly different element in relation to the site works. It's not always necessary. Like, it's usually at a different scale in relation to housing, for example, villas. It requires a different a mindset from a management point of view. The systems themselves, it's similar. And retrofit is perfect for. So because it's on the outside of the building, it doesn't affect the inside beyond the fact that someone is working outside your building. Like, so it's possible. There's advantages, and retrofit from an energy savings point of view to take an uninsulated building to an energy efficient building. You need external wall insulation. So EIFS is the answer in relation to that around the world. I don't have to argue too much about that point, and that would be kind of industry standard in around the world. EIFS would be regarded as the retrofit solution for energy efficient buildings.
Right. Speaking of energy efficiency, because the UAE is still kind of new in these whole things, how does Terraco support new designers or developers or even subcontractors who are looking and are specifically interested in EIFS? What are you guys doing in that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, as I said to you previously, we over the last 10 years we were thrown in at the deep end in relation to EIFS systems. So we Terraco in UAE would have been the base for all of our EIFS systems in the Middle East, and we have a factory, a successful business. We have the head office there, so it was a natural progression that we do this across the group in Korea, Russia. We have in Europe, so EIFS systems transfer into the climate of in the Middle East climate, the natural progression to support the local industries who are trying to understand designers, developers. When they're specifying the EIFS, we would support them. Obviously, we have third-party certification in the Middle East. There's a myriad of testing that are required, as I mentioned. One of the main issues in the Middle East is in relation to fire safety compliance. Mm-hmm. That's critical. So even as a specifier who's specifying the EIFS without Terraco, they really have to take into consideration what is actually being supplied on the ground. So it needs to be a single source supplier, and it needs to be designed by a professional EIFS certified, internationally certified company. So as I said to you before, we lead large scale fire testing. We've done these in the Middle East, wind load resistance testing. As I said, we've all the testing that is required for all EIFS manufacturers in the Middle East. And then in relation to training of supervisors, or training of contractors, EIFS contractors and supervision, all of that needs to be part of the system certification in the Middle East. That's critical to get a system that's certified. We would provide basically it's required in the Middle East to have a system that's warranted, and Terraco would then provide a 10-year system warranty, which would be provided in triplicate by Terraco as the manufacturer designer, the insulation board manufacturer. Their warranty on the thermal efficiency and the performance of the board, and then the approved EIFS contractor. So there's a benefit to the building owners and the specifiers that there's someone in charge of the system and is consistently running the projects from the very start, from the inception till the end. So I think that's what we provide. I mean, I have a list of what we actually do. We have, I mean, I don't know if we'd be here all day if I list everything.
Right.
But we provide specifications, U-value calculations, shop drawings. We have support services. We have architectural submissions, contractor supervisors, trail supervisors, contractor training, and we have CPDs and EIFS training and guidance for specifiers. So we have to be approachable. It's specifiers are not sure of the systems, we want to be the people who provide the answers. Even if it doesn't end up as Terraco, at least the industry moves forward. And we provide sample services. We're there on the ground. We're not taking it in from Germany. We're not importing it. We produce the products. We supply the full system. So I think that's the benefit of
interesting.
In the Middle East.
You've mentioned a lot of them, and I now understand, like, you guys are extremely hands-on, especially here in the Middle East. But amongst these different benefits of the EIFS system, what would you think, in your opinion, is the biggest benefit? And I guess what's something that that you immediately tell people when they ask you what's great about using the EIFS system?
Yeah, the EIFS system, I think, is basically there's a few elements to it, really. I mean, it was introduced and its main criteria is related to thermal efficiency. So, but it also has the benefit of the 40, 50, 60 years that maybe locally wouldn't be regarded as or known, like that the system is designed specifically, it's tested, warranted. So it's a system that is a cladding system, a facade cladding system. It has design flexibility. There's not long lead-in times. There's thousands of colours that the systems providers, Terraco will have colour suitable for the exterior, harsh exterior in the Middle East. And so there's lots of benefits in relation to the finishes, but thermal efficiency is the main element, because you're wrapping the building with insulation, which is something that other external wall insulation systems or thermally efficient walls, it's difficult to do. So wrapping the building continuously around the wall, it's like a coat. If there's no gaps in the coat, then you're keeping warm. Obviously in the Middle East it's a little bit of a different explanation, but if there's no gaps in the insulation, there's no energy loss. So energy loss or thermal bridging is something that is talked about in Europe. It's basically hot bridging in the Middle East, but that's a whole other subject, you know.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we're talking about this as well, because especially here in the Middle East, I don't think people understand how much work goes into making energy efficient buildings, especially because the climate here is just quite extreme. And I think this is a good way for us to open that conversation as well, into letting others know that, sustainability also comes with, retaining and keeping buildings as energy efficient as possible. So building onto that, do you think you have any examples or any case studies of some of the benefits that the EIFS system had in the Middle East, like a particular building or a retrofitting project, anything?
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues in the Middle East is that the project starts, if it's new build, it's part of the building regulations. So and the external wall has to have a certain thermal efficiency. So, but over the years, you mentioned retrofit. So we do have examples of buildings that were uninsulated, external solid wall block, traditional external walls in the Middle East, and then they were retrofitted. So it's a good example of what way and the energy efficiency that we were able to record. So we do have a couple of examples, and for example, in the UAE, we had a project which was villas typically are easier to control, to work out the energy efficiency. So we had a villa in Ajman that was we had all the electricity bills previously from the project, and the assessments. So we were able to assess the annual air conditioning use before the insulation, the solid wall insulation. Then afterwards, we installed the Terraco EIFS Alpha system. So that was 50 mil expanded polystyrene. Without getting too technical, that was to the building regulations at the time. So that was the electricity, and ultimately the electricity bill, when it was checked for the year afterwards, there was a 27% savings as a result of the EIFS installation. So that's kind of what would be between 20 and 30% would be expected on a villa of that size. The size of the building and the external walls kind of dictates it. So that was one example. That's actually a tangible example where we have the energy demands, the air conditioning energy demand before and after. So the second example, it would be, from a building energy simulation, which would be an equivalent way to work out the benefits of energy efficient measures. So like in Saudi Arabia, we have an example of a building which is 400 odd square meters. The software will work out the simulation of the model, works out the benefits of all the energy efficient measures. So it's a really useful tool to indicate before and after, or the benefit of each energy efficient measure. So just in terms of deep retrofit, it's very, very useful tool to show uninsulated walls versus insulated wall, but also roof insulation with thermal insulation. We promote the whole insulation of the whole building. So there's also people will know about single glazing as opposed to double glazing. And then, you also have inefficient heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, which, if they're starting off from a low base and inefficiency, basically when when we've done the models for this building, after the installation of external wall insulation, the energy savings were 24% in this case. So in terms of what was the most energy efficient element to a villa, in this case, and in most cases, EIFS external wall insulation is the biggest energy savings at 24%, when roof insulation was to the building regulations is installed and inputted. That resulted in 18% energy savings. And then, surprisingly to me, I thought air conditioning, the energy efficient air conditioning, there's a method of assessing the efficiency of that by coefficient of performance. So if it went from 2 to 5, 5 being the 5-star, basically the best energy efficiency, there was 12% energy savings.
Wow.
And double glazing, I thought would be in the Middle East would be better. It would be better in this part of the world, but actually in the model that was run, double glazing was only 2% energy savings. So there's elements there that to me highlight that IFS, the external walls, especially in housing, it's the benefit is you can't ignore it. It can't be ignored in deep retrofit. So in commercial buildings, it's slightly different the way they design buildings. So, but in residential and basically in residential and in the cases where there's quite a high percentage of external wall, it can't be ignored. So that's the basis of our studies that we have.
I have a curious question, but let's say that I want to, put an EIFS system on my villa. How long would this take? How long is the process going to be from start to finish?
It sounds like you're looking for a cheap job to be done for your villa. Basically, retrofit. If you have a villa and it's 2,000, say 200 square meters, it's priced for retrofit. If you just did the external insulation finish systems, in another life, I was a contractor, so I have a good bit of experience on the IFS side of it from a contracting point of view. You wouldn't be expecting the detailing in the Middle East for IFS is very simple. So by the time a 2-story villa, it would take a couple of weeks.
Interesting. I asked because I think, especially here in Dubai, of where I live, it's just a lot of people really value their time. You know what I mean? Like it's all about speed. I see a building being built in foundations, and it's done in the next few years. So
sorry to cut across you, but basically, I think when I say 2 weeks, I'm talking about Irish style because people have a lot of cups of tea while they're working. But Lowell, how IFS is done in the Middle East, and the drying times 1 week easy, because they will just go ahead. Now there are criteria you have to wait for different base coats and stuff like that, but the guts of the project can be done very quickly, and there's no reason why with economies of scale, like if you have a villa, your villa, and there's 50 villas in the facility, ramp it up, do 50 villas. There's in Europe, that's the way it would be done, and then they're able to do the whole 50 villas and upgrade at the same time. Doing it individually, there's no economies of scale, and the cost is slightly higher. But if you can convince your labour to do it as well, this is what happens in Ireland in Europe in relation to deep retrofit. And in deep retrofit in Europe, there's incentives. There's huge incentives to make your building energy efficiency, which is probably going to happen somewhere down the line in the Middle East.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I think the conversations are starting, and there's a lot of different PPPs also being, placed for this kind of thing, especially because green building is such a big thing now here. But anyway, I wanted to talk about Europe a little bit. Do you see any trends in Europe, Ireland, and so on related to the IFS that are quite relevant for the Middle East?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That's one of the topics in relation to what the good point of being able to do work, go over to UAE a couple of times a year. Obviously during COVID it was a little bit restricted, but since 2014, I used to go over twice a year. So I can see the difference and how it progressed in relation to different systems. The introduction of fire resistant. You have two systems now. You have EPS systems and mineral wool systems. So in terms of European models and trends in Europe, really the big issue I see is that in the Middle East, the energy performance of a building, like, it's difficult for the homeowner or a layman to understand what type of energy efficiency the building has. While in Europe, like all buildings which are either new or old and are required to be sold, or when they're being sold, it must have an energy performance certificate. So basically, a owner, estate agents, solicitors, they must legally provide an energy efficiency document, an energy performance certificate document. So that's independently assessed energy ratings, or EPC, for the building for sale. And the other element that's not clear in the Middle East is really the fact that, and the benefit of the European system and the clarity with the European system is, the rating bands are very clear. So a little bit like your fridge, they have an A1 energy efficiency, which is the most energy efficient, to an E energy efficiency, which you can guess is the most costly, is the most inefficient. So people in Europe can see that the E-rated building that they're going to buy is going to cost a fortune to heat or cool. While in the Middle East, if you have a villa that was done in 2016, 18, and it looks your next door neighbour had their villa since 2009 without insulation, without energy efficient measures, there's no real way, and there's no obligation to tell the seller, the vendor is under no obligation, and that doesn't really help with energy efficiency and the common goal for carbon reduction and energy efficiency across the world. And in the Middle East, it just leads to get to that. Like in the past, Europe, in the past Europe before 2012, there was it was the same situation. So that trend is what happened in Europe. So just it leads a little bit more agreement, I think, across the board. Even in the middle, even in a country like Dubai, there's different systems, and they're good systems, but they're you have the Estidama system, you have the green building regulations, you have different and the Saudi regulations. They all are based on the same principle that for energy conservation, but there's no kind of way to pull it together so that someone who lives in one country or one region sees the energy efficiency. So that's one element. The other element, I think, really is, I kind of discussed about deep retrofit, is that in Europe we recognise, and the European Parliament has recognised, which is 28 governments. So if 28 governments can do it, I think the Middle East and even the regional areas can recognise that existing building stock is a huge energy. There's a lot of inefficient energy stock in the Middle East, and it leads deep retrofitting of residential. At the moment, a lot of the deep retrofit is concentrated on commercial buildings. They can change the air conditioning. They can, energy efficiency, change the light bulbs to energy efficient light bulbs, the electricity supply, water, sustainability, all of this. But in relation to energy, which is needed for air conditioning, or the air conditioning which uses up more energy in external or in villas which are uninsulated. In Europe, they recognise this, and they've actually, to get to the point, I suppose, is they're funding it. They're actually paying people. They've 20 billion euro allocated over the next 10 years in projects such as the Renovate Europe, which is a big campaign to focus on energy demand of the existing building stock. Yeah. Like, they're trying to reduce energy, which is carbon production, by 80%. It's much more discussed in Europe, and subsidies are a huge part of that. So individual homeowners, for example, in Ireland, if I have a small house and it's a detached house, I can get €8,000, the equivalent of 8,000 US dollars, without, as long as I do external insulation to the house, I get paid that. So I maybe get 50% of the cost of the work from the government, from the EU. And then they also, one thing I think that also could be looked into is the fact that in Europe, this money is being used by local authorities. They have, their local authorities have public housing. And what they do is they upgrade the public housing and for urban regeneration. So EIFS is a really perfect answer because it regenerates the facades as well. It makes it, turns a drab elevation. So it's that designers and architects they can make something that didn't look good and energy efficient at the same time. So there's a lot of that work is done for free, because sometimes the people in local authority housings maybe can't afford the upgrade, and it's really the responsibility of the local authority in Europe. So that's the basis for that's the system there. And the other element I think is related to a cohesion of the EIFS industry in the Middle East. While we all work together and it's a combined interest to energy conservation, we're all individual businesses, and in Europe it's well established. So we've learned a lot. Terraco have learned a lot by being members of the we're EIFS members of the European Association for Ethics, which is EIFS. I think it's a voice for EIFS or ethics in Europe. So it represents the industry, and it opens dialogue with the European Institute and stakeholders. It's really it's progressive. It holds technical meetings so that the standards are kept high. So I think something like this in the Middle East would really be beneficial from an industry point of view as it develops. So
I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from Europe in terms of just mandating these kinds of things. And also, you're right, there is a lot of certifications going around, especially here in the UAE. We have LEED, we have STIDMA, we have a lot of these different certifications, but a lot of people and consumers themselves don't understand what they mean. So this is a conversation that is what I know from attending different conferences of green building institutes and councils, that they're trying to have something in place, but it's still in the groundworks, and it's probably going to happen, but not in anytime soon. But the good news is that the Middle East is progressing in terms of sustainable construction. So hopefully in the next 5 years or 10 years, who knows?
Yeah, no, it's definitely the positive element is that for the last 10 years, it's gone from low, uninsulated, energy inefficient buildings. And then there is a lot of legislation across the Middle East for energy efficient buildings. But the big key is mandatory. If you have mandatory regulations, I think in Dubai, it's tied into the utility that you can't typically that's what's done. There has to be governance on the element of energy efficiency. And the benefit, I think, the only way to see a benefit is with the bandings, is independent auditing of buildings, which will take time, but it's done in Europe. It's not overly complicated. Yeah. And the STIDMA you mentioned, and the Saudi regs, and the Dubai regulations, they all have elements that are the exact same as internationally. The way that a building is assessed, it just needs to be titled so that everyone is on the same page, basically.
Yeah, agreed.
That's exactly the issue, I think. So that's the main elements to the discussion.
Yeah. So I think the last question I have for you is, kind of ties in with Terraco. How's the new year looking for Terraco? Is there anything new that the company is doing? How's 2024 looking for you guys?
Yeah, 2024 is looking really good. I was in Dubai in December for the first time in nearly 3.5 years because of COVID. So I was at the big five.
Big five.
I know from from talking to our technical manager or technical director in the group, he works with me here, that the figures for IFS are back up after a bit of a slowdown during the pandemic, and obviously the energy efficiency measures are big part of that. So yeah, in general, the business for IFS is looking good. The actual business for Terraco is very busy. So IFS in Terraco in the Gulf region, it's we have lots of partners, and a lot of the projects we're working on that were slowed down during the last couple of years are now activated, and IFS is a big part of that. So what we would like is retrofit. We're doing a little bit of retrofit. We have a project which is a high-rise commercial, which we're hoping to start pretty soon, and I'm very anxious to get some statistics on that one, because if we're doing that in isolation, it'll give us a good idea of what the benefit on commercial buildings. So in general, I think everything is trending in the right direction, as they say. So IFS is growing, and I think in Saudi Arabia we're looking to expand into our business bigger into Saudi Arabia, and obviously we have factories in other parts of the Middle East where we get a certain amount of IFS work, but as COP28 was in December as well. So I think there's a lot of interest in the whole energy conservation, CO2 reduction targets. So ultimately, the countries that have energy efficient measures, there's going to be an emphasis to make those mandatory. So like, we want to be one of the leaders and one of the go-to companies in relation to external wall insulation, but in general, thermal insulation and energy efficiency measures is part of the whole industry. Like, it's a combined in sustainability as well. So as you mentioned at the start, Terraco is the sustainability. You can't be more sustainable than being in the region, and that's our motto. So the other element I briefly to touch on with retrofit was that when EIFS is specified in projects, it also prevents demolition of existing buildings. So people, that's sustainable. There's no demolition, there's no landfill, and low rebuild costs in terms of the structure and carbon production, which again is what we're all trying to prevent as a result of climate change. So again, all of these elements tie in. It's very progressive in the Middle East, and it's upward and onwards in hopefully in the next few years.
Yeah, that's really good to know, and honestly, really excited to see what Terraco has in store. Again, thank you so much, Tom, for your time and for speaking to us about the IFS. I know it's definitely a topic that a lot of people don't know about, so this is a great way for us to educate them. And if the listeners have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Tom or Terraco in the next few weeks. Thank you so much, and that's a wrap. Of course, thank you everyone for tuning in. Be sure to follow us on our social channels and rate us on our streaming platforms. I hope everyone enjoyed today's episode and found it as informative as I did. Until next time, thank you.